November 3rd, 1955, the Sands Hotel, Las Vegas. The band stopped playing before anyone realized why. Laughter in the showroom collapsed into an uneasy silence, as if the room itself had taken a step back. Under the stage lights, Dean Martin stood motionless at the microphone, eyes fixed forward, his smile gone. A powerful man in the audience had just made a joke about his mother. Not a careless joke, not a misunderstanding. A line crossed, publicly, deliberately, and dangerously. In a city ruled by quiet threats, why didn't Dean respond right away? And how did a calm voice manage to freeze an entire room that feared violence? What happened that night was not remembered because of an argument, or a threat, or a fight. It endured because it exposed something most people in that room already understood, but rarely saw challenged. In mid-1950s Las Vegas, power did not announce itself loudly. It operated through ownership, favors, silence, and fear. Performers were allowed success, but only as long as they understood where the real authority lived. One wrong response, one public misstep could quietly end a career without explanation. That is why the moment mattered. A joke about a mother was never just a joke. It was a test, a reminder of hierarchy, a public assertion of dominance in a city where backing down was often the safest option. Everyone in the showroom recognized the rules instantly, and they also knew what usually came next. But what followed that insult did not fit the pattern. Instead of escalation, there was restraint. Instead of submission, there was composure. Instead of fear, there was something far more unsettling: moral clarity. The significance of that night lies not in what was said, but in what was challenged. It questioned whether power had to rely on intimidation to survive, and whether dignity could exist in a place built on quiet coercion. The consequences of that choice would not be immediate. They would unfold slowly in reputation, in memory, and in how this story would be told long after the lights went out. By the mid-1950s, Las Vegas was no longer just a desert gambling town. It had become a carefully balanced ecosystem of glamour and control, where money flowed freely on the surface and power operated quietly beneath it. Casinos were stages, showrooms were currency, and access was everything. Performers didn't just sing or entertain, they survived by understanding unspoken rules. Those rules were enforced without paperwork, without courts, and often without witnesses. On stage that night stood Dean Martin, a man widely misunderstood by the image he projected. To the public, he was effortless, detached, amused, seemingly unbothered by pressure. The glass always appeared half full in his hand, the smile always slightly crooked. But behind that image was discipline, control, a deep respect for boundaries, especially those tied to family and origin. Dean Martin was not reckless. He had watched careers stall overnight. He had seen what happened to performers who embarrassed the wrong people in the wrong rooms. His calm demeanor was not ignorance. It was awareness. And beneath that awareness lived a personal code shaped long before Vegas ever knew his name. His mother, Angela, had come to America with nothing but expectation and pride. Her lessons were not theatrical, they were practical. Dignity mattered. How you treated people when no one was watching mattered even more. Those ideas stayed with her son long after fame replaced scarcity. Across the room sat a very different figure. The mob boss did not need an introduction. His presence carried it. He represented the authority that never appeared on contracts but dictated them anyway. He was accustomed to rooms adjusting to him, laughter bending, conversation stopping, people recalculating their posture the moment he entered. Respect in his world was enforced through reminder. The audience that night understood both men. They understood Dean's value to the showroom, and they understood how fragile that value could be. They knew that humor, charm, and talent meant nothing if power decided otherwise. That is why, when the insult landed, no one reacted. No gasps, no objections, only stillness. Because everyone knew the same thing. This wasn't about a joke. It was about who would define strength in that room and what it would cost. The night had started the way most nights did at the Sands. Smooth, rehearsed, predictable. Dean moved through his set with ease, his voice steady, the band following him without effort. The audience leaned in, comfortable, entertained, confident they were in capable hands. This was familiar territory. This was controlled territory. Then the door opened. The interruption was not dramatic at first. No shouting, no sudden confrontation, just a shift in attention. Heads turned instinctively, the way they always did when someone important arrived unannounced. The mob boss entered loudly enough to be noticed, casually enough to make it clear he expected the room to accommodate him. Drinks were adjusted. Conversation softened. The rhythm of the showroom bent, just slightly, around his presence. Dean noticed, of course. He always did. But he kept singing. The first comment came from the audience floor, sharp enough to cut through the music. A remark about energy, about effort, disrespectful, but not unusual. A lesser performer might have bristled. Dean didn't. He smiled, acknowledged it, returned a line that drew laughter without escalating the moment. The room relaxed again. The test, it seemed, had passed. But the night didn't move on. 20 minutes later, Dean shifted tone. He began telling a story, one he had told before, but never lightly. He spoke about growing up, about lessons learned early, about the woman who had raised him. His voice softened. The band lowered behind him. The audience listened in a different way now, not as spectators, but as witnesses. It was a story about his mother, about respect, about manners, about how character revealed itself when no one was impressed. It wasn't sentimental. It was grounded. The kind of story that didn't demand applause, only attention. People nodded, smiled. A few leaned back, settling into the memory being shared. That was when the room shifted again. The mob boss stood. Chairs scraped. The sound was small, but it carried. He didn't shout at first. He didn't need to. His voice filled the space naturally, practiced, confident. He commented on the lesson, on how Dean's mother might have taught him manners, but not how the city really worked. It was phrased casually, almost amused, but everyone understood what had just happened. The insult wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed precisely where it would hurt the most. Not at Dean the performer, but at Dean the son, at a woman who wasn't there to defend herself, at a memory that mattered. The band stopped playing. No one told them to. They simply understood that sound no longer belonged in the room. The spotlight wavered, unsure where to rest. The audience didn't laugh this time. They didn't react at all. Silence spread outward from the stage, heavy and unmistakable. Every person in that showroom knew the stakes. If Dean ignored it, the message would be clear. Power had spoken, and he had accepted it. If he responded the wrong way, the consequences wouldn't be public. They would come later, quietly, through bookings that disappeared, through doors that stopped opening. Dean stood still. He didn't look at the band. He didn't look at the audience. For a moment, it seemed as though he was simply breathing, measuring the space between himself and the man who had challenged him. There was no anger on his face, no fear either, only calculation. The room waited. This was the moment performers talked about in private and hoped never to face in public. The moment when talent stopped mattering and judgment took over. When survival depended not on what you felt, but on what you chose to do next. Dean leaned slightly toward the microphone, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm enough to make the silence feel intentional. The moment that changed the room. Dean did not raise his voice. He did not smile. He did not rush. He stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes steady, as if he were choosing each breath before allowing the next one to arrive. When he spoke, it was almost quiet, quiet enough that people leaned forward without realizing they had moved. He thanked the man for bringing up his mother. The words landed strangely. Gratitude was not the reaction anyone expected. A few people glanced toward the tables near the back, trying to read the mob boss's expression. He appeared amused, even satisfied, as if the night had finally gone where he intended it to go. Dean continued. He spoke about his mother arriving in America young, with no money, no English, and no protection. He spoke about work, cleaning houses, cooking meals, scrubbing floors for people who barely noticed she existed. The room remained silent, but it was no longer tense in the same way. Something had shifted. This was no longer confrontation. It was testimony. He talked about how power reveals people, how some of the families his mother worked for treated her with courtesy, calling her by name, saying please and thank you, and how others treated her as if being poor meant being invisible, as if labor stripped a person of dignity. The mob boss stopped smiling. Dean did not look away from him as he spoke. Not aggressively, not defiantly, just steadily, as if the rest of the room no longer existed. He repeated something his mother used to tell him, that cruelty displayed from a position of power was not strength, but weakness. That people who needed to make others feel small were usually trying to hide how small they felt themselves. That real strength, real authority, came from restraint, from knowing you could hurt someone and choosing not to. By now, the air in the showroom felt heavy, almost pressurized. The mob boss shifted his weight. The men around him no longer laughed. No one interrupted. Dean didn't accuse. He didn't threaten. He didn't demand respect. He simply held up a mirror. He explained that making jokes about someone's mother, especially someone who could not answer back, was not dominance. It was desperation, a need to be seen, a need to remind others of power that required constant reinforcement. Then he did something no one expected. He said he would continue the show. Not as an act of defiance, not as a challenge, but as a decision. He said he would honor his mother the only way she ever asked him to, by treating everyone in that room with dignity, even those who had shown none, even those who believed fear was the same thing as respect. The silence that followed was complete. No applause, no movement, just the sound of people breathing, absorbing what they had just witnessed. In a city where authority was enforced quietly and violently, a line had been crossed without force, without threats, without spectacle. Dean turned slightly toward the band and called for the next song. Music returned to the room, but the atmosphere did not. The performance continued, yet everyone knew the night had already reached its point of no return. A powerful man had come to remind a room who was in control. Instead, he had been reminded of something else. The show ended without incident. No confrontation, no raised voices, no visible fallout. To an outsider, it might have looked like nothing extraordinary had happened at all. But in Las Vegas, absence was often louder than noise. Backstage, Dean removed his jacket slowly, methodically. His manager hovered nearby, tense, speaking in half sentences, already calculating damage control. Everyone understood what normally followed moments like that. Quiet retaliation, canceled dates, a slow tightening of opportunities until a performer simply disappeared from the circuit. Then came the knock. Not security, not a messenger with threats. Just a man asking if Dean would step outside. The request carried weight without urgency, the way power preferred it. Dean didn't hesitate. He didn't argue. He didn't bring anyone with him. Out in the parking lot, the city felt different. The noise of the showroom didn't reach that far. Neon lights hummed. A Cadillac idled nearby. The mob boss stood alone, cigarette in hand, his crew keeping a deliberate distance. There was no shouting. The man acknowledged what had happened inside, not with an apology in the conventional sense, but with something rarer, recognition. He admitted that the room had turned on him, that words calmly spoken had done what force usually did for him. He made it clear that he still had power, that he could still cause problems if he wanted to. Dean did not challenge that. He simply said that some things mattered more than a career, more than comfort, more than staying safe. For a long moment, the mob boss said nothing. Then he spoke about his own mother, briefly, without detail, just enough to suggest that the message had landed somewhere deeper than pride. They shook hands. No deals were made, no promises exchanged beyond an understanding that the matter was finished. Dean returned inside exhausted, not triumphant. The relief in the room was quiet, cautious. No one celebrated. They simply moved on. In the weeks that followed, nothing changed, on paper. Dean kept performing. His bookings remained intact. But something subtle shifted beneath the surface. The story traveled. Not the dramatic version, the real one, the one where restraint had unsettled authority. And in Las Vegas, that kind of story carried weight. The night was never about winning. It was about definition. In a city built on intimidation disguised as order, the idea that dignity could interrupt power felt almost subversive. Dean did not defeat anyone. He did not expose secrets or challenge structures. He did something quieter and far more dangerous. He refused to play the role expected of him. Most people believe strength announces itself loudly, that it demands space, compliance, fear. But what unfolded that night suggested something else entirely. That strength could exist without spectacle. That authority did not always belong to the person who inspired silence, but sometimes to the one who could remain calm inside it. There is a reason the story endured. Not because a mob boss was embarrassed, not because a performer took a risk, but because people recognized themselves in that moment. They saw the calculation they made every day: when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to protect dignity at a cost. Dean's choice did not dismantle the system around him, but it carved out a small, undeniable truth within it. Power that depends on cruelty is fragile. It must constantly reassert itself. It cannot tolerate mirrors. What his mother taught him was not how to survive Vegas. It was how to remain himself inside it. That distinction mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Years later, the story would be told as legend, not as confrontation, but as contrast. A reminder that violence is not the only language power understands, and that sometimes it understands it last. The room that night didn't erupt. It absorbed. And in doing so, it carried something forward that no threat could erase. In a world where silence is often rewarded and compliance mistaken for wisdom, the decision to speak calmly can feel reckless, even dangerous. So the question remains, when power tests you, quietly, deliberately, what do you protect first? Your position, your safety, or the part of yourself you won't get back if you surrender it? This was only one night in a city full of unspoken rules. And it was not the last time someone would learn how much those rules could bend when met with restraint instead of fear. End.